for it to start. Okay. All right, everybody. So just for a bit of housekeeping, just wanting to make sure that we're in quiet rooms. Myself, I've got some roadworks going on, so I've put my headphones on just so you don't have too much background noise. And there will be participation throughout. So there will be testing your knowledge. There will be quiz questions throughout to make it as engaging as possible and not just me chatting at you. We want to make sure you feel like you're getting the most from the session today, all about malnutrition and hydration. And why we're looking at it is because in general, we know that there is still a high prevalence of malnutrition in care homes. 1 in 3 residents of care homes have malnutrition or at risk of it. And it has a huge health and cost impact on the individuals, but also on the NHS. We know that if someone is malnourished, they are at higher risk of frailty and falls and infections, hospital admissions, longer recovery, wounds, disabilities, and even death. And it really impacts on that ability to recover from infections and wounds and just all those abilities to care for oneself and do all those activities that promote quality of life. It just reduces all of that entirely and affects mood as well. So today we'll be learning about screening for that risk of malnutrition, assessing someone's nutritional status, so how nourished they are, how to implement a plan that is as bespoke and tailored as possible to an individual, and how to customize those plans to residents' needs and requirements and preferences. This is important because as at care homes, there are regulations to follow. There's national guidance as well from NICE, all about meeting residents' nutritional needs, and not just for energy, but also for those smaller vitamins and minerals, fibre and protein. And the CQC have a regulation 14 specific, all about nutrition and hydration, about meeting those unique needs, and according to their preferences, religious and cultural backgrounds need to also be taken into account. So when you take someone into a care home, you're agreeing that you'll try and meet someone's nutrition, hydration needs. So a lot of excuse me, a little bit coldy, so you have to have some patience for me. Most of our training today will be going in depth through this malnutrition management pathway that was created in collaboration with all the Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Berkshire West Trusts. There was a working task group put together. And we came up with a management pathway which covers all those aspects of managing malnutrition. In terms of how you can find it, we've got it on our website. So it's a public-facing website. The links are there. And it goes through all of these steps in detail. So recommend when we send out the certificates, you'll get the link directly to the resource, but we'll be going through it in detail today. So in terms of what this pathway covers, it's broken down into 4 steps. And those steps are, step 1 is all about assessing for that someone's risk of malnutrition. Step 2 is interpreting that risk and what is the impact of that. Do you need to act now? Do you need to escalate? What do you need to do? How do you interpret that, and how do you address those underlying causes of why someone's malnourished or at risk of malnutrition? Step 3 is about implementing their care plan for managing malnutrition, and step 4 is reviewing that plan and escalating it as needed to local services. So going to go into step 1, so that's assessing the risk of malnutrition. It's important to still know how to do it because we know from our audits that a third of... Sorry, I'm getting a call from someone who's meant to be attending. Let me just see if I can pull her in, perhaps. I'll just request her to join. See if that helps. I don't know why she's ringing me. Sorry, I'm just ready. So why it's important to still know how to assess malnutrition is because we know from audits that a third of must scores were inaccurate in care homes, and sometimes that's a human error and sometimes that's a software error. So it's important to still know how to do it, because we know in the care homes where everybody knew how to do a must score, which I'll explain in a second, there were no errors. So in terms of this must score, it's a universal screening tool for measuring someone's risk of malnutrition. It looks at their weight against their height, and it looks at their weight loss over time. So if you were to have a new resident or having a review of a resident, you would want to obviously weigh them and have a little common sense check initially to just double check, does that weight make sense, or is it really, really different from previous weights? And then when you're looking at weight history, we're looking at the last a 3 to 6 month window historically. So looking at those last 6 months and looking what's that weight been doing for the last 3 to 6 months. So this is from the malnutrition pathway. So it looks initially at the weight, so you would weigh them. There is, within this pathway, there is a link to the Bapen tool if you were doing it manually. There's a tutorial video as well on how to use that Bapen calculator online. If you're doing it manually, you would look initially at their BMI, so that's their weight, and you would divide it, that's their weight in kilos, and then you'd look at their height in meters and divide it by their height and divide it by the height again, and that gives you a BMI. And then there are scores assigned to the different BMI. So if their BMI is over 20, that's perfectly fine and healthy and no concern. It's a score of 0. If their BMI is between 18.5 and 20, that would score a 1, and an under 18.5 would score a 2. Then you would look at that weight history, and you would look at their highest weight in the last 6 months and calculate the difference. So how much weight have they lost? If they've gained weight, they would score 0 because there's no concerns if they're gaining weight. We're looking at how much they've lost. So if they were 45 kilos and now they're 40, you would do 45 minus 40, and that's that 5 kilos difference that they've lost. And then you do a bit of maths and you have to do 5 kilos that they've lost and divide it by what their weight was originally. To get a percentage, you times it by 100. So if they've lost less than 5%, then you would score 0. Between 5 to 10% would score 1, and over 10% loss, obviously much more of a concern, that would score 2. And you basically just add those scores together. So the BMI score of 0 to 2, the weight loss score of 0 to 2, and add them together to get the must score. There's an extra element there about acute disease effect. In your community, out in the residence care homes, we don't tend to score anything for that. That's more reserved for those that are acutely unwell. They've not been eating or drinking for 5 days because they're so poorly. So we don't tend to score anything for that one once someone's at home and not acutely unwell. So when you've got your final must score, a 0 would be low risk, must score of 1 is medium risk, and must score of 2 or above is high risk. We'll go into a bit more detail what happens then. But if you couldn't weigh someone, there are also tools called a mid-upper arm circumference. I've got links in the malnutrition pathway on the Bapen tool for a bit more information about how to do that. So it's a measurement. You take the tape measure, measure the length of the arm, find that midpoint, and then measure around the middle. And that just gives you a bit of a broader picture of malnutrition and whether they might be underweight or not. And you could also visually assess to see perhaps they're losing weight. They've got more drawn skin on their face or around their shoulder blades, on their hands between their thumb and their palm. Their clothes become more loose, and you can see that visible muscle loss, protruding ribs, and etc. There are lots of physical signs, as well as they might be getting more frequent admissions or frequent infections and wounds, and that can also be a sign that they're not eating and drinking well enough. So what comes next is you've got your score. So if they were a must score of 0, that would be that low risk and no interventions need to be implemented at that point, but do keep an eye because they might be on a downward trend. Must score of 1 would say is medium risk, and we want to prevent that from getting worse. So you might start implementing some enriching diet or snacks, as we'll go into today about what you might be able to do. And that high risk of must of 2 or above, that's where you definitely need to start implementing a plan and going through all the steps that we'll be going through today, and act now, basically. In terms of testing your knowledge, we're going to be doing a Mentimeter quiz. You don't have to get out your smartphones because I'm able to do it from within Teams now, so don't worry about using your smartphones throughout. But we are going to work through an example together. So we've got Mrs. Smith, and she's 84. She's recently moved into the care home, and you're doing her initial nutrition screening. Her weight's 45, her height is 1.55 meters, and 3 to 6 months ago, she was 50 kilos. The reason she's lost weight is because she's had a chest infection and she's not been eating well, but she is starting to eat normally again. So what we're going to do is find her BMI and then the score associated with that. I'm going to calculate her weight loss and her percentage, and then get a total must score at the end. So 45, I don't know if you want to calculate it. I will launch the end though, because it's let me present within the Teams. Bear with me. Use that together. just loading. So I'm not able to show both. So you can hopefully do it from within the screen and get ready. Perfect. And then we'll start the quiz. So we don't do all questions at once. We'll dip in and out of it throughout the session. And start the quiz. Oh, that didn't go very well, did it? Let me escape it. Try again. Got an error code for some reason. Let's try again. And if it doesn't work this time, I won't waste more time. We'll just do the questions. Let's see. Okay. So which of these are not common signs of malnutrition? And this got frailty, sarcopenia, or improved wound healing. Oh, yes, Sarah, sorry, is it not working?
I don't think it's come. No, it's come up. Oh, it's only come up half on my screen, I have to say.
Oh. Okay, we'll just do the questions and I won't bother with the Mentimeter because I don't want to faff around when technology is not working. I'll go back to my slides. Sorry. It worked in our last one, but it's been a month since then. You know, you just forget how to get it working. I don't want to faff with it if it's not working. Sorry, it's just loading the slides. So we're going through, it was just a quick question. So of the not common signs of malnutrition, so it was frailty, sarcopenia, and improved wound healing. If anyone would put it in the chat, what they might think is not a common sign of malnutrition. I can write the question again. Which are not two. Oh, I'm spelling wrong. Forgive me. 3. Wound healing. Oh, sorry. Just send that. You can put a number in the chat. That was just to test the waters, initial testing question. We're getting some responses. I've got a response of 1. I've got some response of 3, more response of 3, more response of 3. So of the not common signs of malnutrition would be improved wound healing. That was a good tester question to get you started with. Okay, so then the BMI of Mrs. Smith. So just quick maths, you could use your calculators because I don't expect you to be able to do that in your heads. But 45 divided by 1.5 divided by 1.55. Again, you put your answers in the chat if you want to, but I know that's tricky math, so we can skip to the answers. But we already got a correct answer there in the chat. So the correct BMI is 18.7. And if we were to give a score for that, would anyone in the chat happy to share what they think the score would be for 18.7? So Alexandra said, yes, we got a score of 1, which is medium. Thank you very much. So she historically was 50 kilos and now she's 45. So if you could feel confident answering what her the amount of weight loss that she has experienced in kilos and the percentage and the score, and then major points to whoever gets there first. So she was 50 kilos and now she's 45. Excellent, Joanne. Oh, wait, let me check my mind. Yeah, sorry, that's fine. Yeah, that was correct. So obviously in a lot of your care homes, the must scores are done electronically. But as I said, we know that the understanding of what's happening behind those scores is not always there. So really it's about applying it and thinking what's going on behind it. If someone's got a must score of 1, that might be they're slim or they've lost a little bit of weight. But if they've got a score of 2 above, then you know they've been losing a significant amount of weight or they're really, really slim. And it's just about understanding what those numbers mean and then how, because everyone needs to take responsibility for malnutrition. It's about thinking, okay, I really need to act here, or perhaps this is more for monitoring and not worrying too much at this stage. It's about really interpreting what the input of is required. Thank you. Apologies for the quiz there, but we'll just do it a bit more through the chat instead. So step 2, so you've got your score. So for Miss Smith, for example, she'd had a BMI of 18.7 and her weight loss, she'd lost 10%. So altogether, she would have been a must score of 3 from adding those 2 scores together, and that'd be high risk. So say if someone was high risk, what would we do next in interpreting it and addressing those underlying causes? And there can be lots of different things that can be going on for someone and why they've been losing weight. We mentioned Mrs. Smith, she'd had a chest infection, but it might be that they've got a progressive condition and it's quite normal to see weight loss in those circumstances. We might also see someone's end of life, and so that's quite normal to stop eating and drinking, or perhaps they've lost weight because they've actually had an amputation. So really considering, is it, if they've been losing muscle and fat, or is it a limb related reduction in their weight? And then sometimes people are acutely unwell, so they might have been in hospital because they have had an infection, or another reason for going in, and because they're poorly, they're not eating, but then actually they'll pick up, they'll get back to baseline and they'll get back to being normal again. So you might not need to implement a really intensive plan because they'll eventually recover and the appetite will get back to normal and their weight will settle again. So they're not necessarily needing to escalate and set all the alarms going. So that was about interpreting. Do we need to act? Do we need to monitor? Do we need to escalate? And when you're thinking about it, you could also think, perhaps if they're a new resident, you might not know all that background about all the admissions and other things that have been going on. So those relatives are a really useful tool. The resident themselves might be able to share, but did they feel they've lost weight and are they worried about it? There's a lot of this really comes down to who is worried, because we can get caught up in numbers and all our scorings and things like that. But when it comes down to it, perhaps they've always been a small eater, and so they've always been slim. So this isn't new, and they're perfectly well. They're not, actively having any signs and symptoms of malnutrition. That's just their norm. So you would adjust your care plan. You wouldn't need to escalate necessarily, unless it's a new issue. And then identifying all those other things that might be going on. This also from the malnutrition pathway, it might be that they're not eating because they're constipated, and so it's important to address that, whether medically or more fibre and fluid in their diet where possible, to try and help. Because if you think they're not going to the bathroom, there's not going to be much room to eat more, and that's going to affect their appetite. Similarly, if they're vomiting and diarrhea, you've got to address the underlying causes of that, and then once that's managed, hopefully their eating and drinking should improve. There's a lot here around agitation and refusing food and fluid, and that might be where your input is limited, because it might be related to their progression of condition, but it also might just be because they're in pain at the moment. And if it's something that you can address, excellent. And if you can't, it's about acknowledging where your input is limited and more promoting quality of life. And then if it's more practical things like they've got dexterity issues, there are specialists that can support with adapted cutlery and or physio related things that can support them to maintain that independence with eating and drinking. And if they can't use cutlery and crockery so much, then finger foods, for example, are a valid alternative solution. So a little case study for you to apply. So for this gentleman, Mr. Ahmed, we are going to be thinking, what is the reason that he's been losing weight, and what could we do to address it, and who could we refer to? So Mr. Ahmed's must score is 2 because he's very slim, higher than 2 actually on reflection. And then if any recent changes, so you've noticed he's been eating less at meal times, he's drinking very poorly, only 600 mils a day, his dentures are fitting more loosely, which is very common if you've been losing weight. It can affect your mouth, and so the dentures won't fit anymore. He's also coughing whilst he's eating. You don't know much about his food preferences, and he's sleepy during his meal times, and he's living with dementia. So I will be just asking the question for you in the chat. So actually, it's very simple. What is the most appropriate first action? And I will just type out the answers for you. I'm going to test how quickly I can type. No pressure. There are your answers, and you just pick a number for me. Excellent. Yeah, so in this instance for Mr. Ahmed, priority would be to initially refer to salt. And that warning sign is the coughing while eating. Also, the fact that he's not drinking much and eating less could be because he's having so much issue with this coughing and it's putting him off, or, and not wanting to eat. So that would be first step to address. And the other one's not necessarily wrong, but less of a priority. So there's different things to do. You could also refer to the dentist for the help with the dentures, and the SALT may recommend, based on their assessment, they might consider thickened fluids or an adjusted texture modified diet, and they'll provide some guidance on that. The fact that he's sleepy during meal times might consider whether it's appropriate to review the actual times that he's offered meals and other foods, or whether certain medications might be making him more sleepy, and the GP or pharmacist might advise on that. With dementia, lots to do. We will discuss dementia in more detail later, but some simple things will be more prompting at meal times and support, or maybe eating more socially could help. Depends on what Mr. Ahmed prefers. And then with eating less, start with the enriching of his meals, and some finger foods could be considered if he's struggling with that, and then starting to monitor his weight for improvements. Okay, so step 2 altogether was really about addressing those underlying causes. So once you've assessed someone's risk of malnutrition, you know if it's a low risk, medium risk, or high risk, and whether you need to act now or not. And that really depends on what has been causing that malnutrition risk to increase. Why have they been losing weight, and is it something that we can do something about? Who can we refer to? What are the specialists? Whether the whole team need to be involved, those occupational therapists, physios, speech and language therapists, doctors, etc. And all those, that whole picture needs to be addressed, because malnutrition is affected by so many different things, and really addressing what is the underlying cause. And if we can treat that, then that makes the rest of the process a lot more smooth sailing. But also acknowledging where input is still appropriate, or whether we can acknowledge our input might be more limited, and where we can go for a more quality of life approach, or just a review, monitor, and see if they go back to baseline. Step 3, implementing that care plan. So the malnutrition pathway breaks down what to do for the different must scores. So if they were a low risk, that would be that routine care, unless they've got perhaps a wound as well. So if they did also have a pressure ulcer or a wound, then you would follow the wound care advice, and you could still look at that. But for must of 1 and 2, our approach is to treat them quite similarly. You still want to address it, but it's that level of intervention where it becomes more different. So to start with, we would encourage doing a food diary, and I'll go into a bit more detail about how that can be a useful tool. And then you would set a goal, an appropriate treatment aim. And then the differences are between the must 1 and 2 is how much extra energy you'd be aiming to provide. So for a must of 1, I think 300 to 500 calories a day extra, and must of 2, at least 500 calories, if not extra 1,000 calories a day. But in terms of how you do that, that's where your knowledge of your resident comes into play. So whether you're enriching their meals, or offering them snacks and or puddings, or extra nourishing drinks, how you get to those calorie goals is up to the unique preferences and requirements of the resident. And then depending on how high risk they are is also affects that level of monitoring. So you would always rescreen that must score monthly, but in terms of how often you weigh them, for a high risk, you might want to weigh them more frequently, just to keep an eye and see if your treatment plan is having the desired impact as you go through the month, rather than waiting a whole month and not knowing it's not having any positive impact. And then bringing you through at the end of that month, you would review, has the treatment plan been working? Has it not? Do we need to escalate? So do we just all carry on at what we've been doing because it's working so far, until your treatment goal has been met? So we're going to start that top of that flow chart and go through the food diary. So food diaries, a lot of people log what residents are eating. That's okay, but I think there's so much more that you can get from a food diary than just what was on the menu that day, really, and just logging it, filing it away, and never looking at it again. It can be a really useful tool. It can help you see what a resident's preferences are, because it can show you what meals they eat more of or which ones they decline more often. It can help you show trends and show you that they've been eating less over the last few days, or it could even show you that they really make the most of certain meals and not others. It can help you confirm and be evidence for the fact that your nutrition care plan's been implemented, because you might say, I'm going to be offering them 2 nourishing drinks a day, and your food diary is there as evidence to show, yep, we offered that mid-morning and mid-afternoon and they took it or they didn't. And it also then, you could then use it as evidence when you're escalating and referring on to specialists. You can actually say, yep, we've been trying food first for a month. This is the information that we have to show that, and then they can build up on there. We also say when not to use a food diary. That would be perhaps if they're end of life and palliative, when you're looking more for a quality of life approach, and also if their weight is stable. It's not necessarily a useful tool then, because you're not having any nutrition intervention. When you've done your food diary, again, what kind of questions you can ask yourself. So checking that they've been offered their 3 meals, or checking they've been offered like 7 drinks a day, checking they've been offered those nourishing drinks, as you've said in your care plan. You could also use it to highlight, oh, they've not been eating. You notice that the trends that they've not been eating. Let's identify any underlying causes recently, or particular meals that eat more or less of. Or perhaps the timing patterns, or that there might be staff on shift that day, and then you notice they always eat better with a certain carer than with others, or they eat better in the dining room, or they eat better alone. So it's really can inform you if you make the most of it. I've got a food diary here, and I just want you to take a little time to reflect and see if you notice anything, and you can put that in the chat, any preferences or patterns to their eating. That might be from the amounts that they're eating and what they're declining. And pop it in the chat, and I'll give you some prompt questions. Question 1, which type of drinks do they decline? And question 2, how many snacks? Okay, a few questions there to reflect on. So the type of drinks that they decline, we've only had one answer so far. Anyone else willing to share? We've had one correct answer from Joanne. She said the milky drink. So if you notice at the mid-morning, they've accepted the smoothie, but then in the afternoon, they declined the homemade milkshake. They also accept a juice and drink all of that juice in the evening meal, but when it came to the hot chocolate in the evening, they've declined that. So the food diary there was useful for showing that they don't really like really milky drinks, but they'll take a fruity one. So when it comes to your care plan, you would put in your care plan, aim to offer fruity, nourishing drinks as opposed to milky ones to have a real benefit. Okay, and then I'll keep tallying up the snacks. Any other volunteers for how many snacks and puddings they're eating? And that third question, what time of day do they eat best? I'm seeing more snacks. We work through them together because they've got biscuits first thing in the morning. That's one. And then they are offered some. Do we count yogurt as a snack? We'll put it as an optional one. It's an extra part of breakfast. Then they're offered a croissant mid-morning. I think that's quite a high energy snack there. And then lunch. I've not been counting as I go, but I'm just showing this one. Sorry. There's puddings. We'll count puddings as well. So puddings, apple crumble with some custard in the afternoon. There's some cake in the evening. There's pudding of fruit and yogurt with some nuts on top, and then there's also nuts in the evening. So it adds up. I think I had 7 from the last time I did this training for puddings and snacks. I don't know if it's a trick question there because I said how many snacks are offered. So yeah, there were 3 snacks times, but there were some extra puddings in there. And then what time of day do they eat best? I think I saw morning. So from the food diary, we can see they're eating all in the breakfast and the mid-morning, but then comes to lunch and they're having half of their meals, if not declining some of the things that they've been offered there. We've got a question there. Should you also consider if medication is covert, as this can change the taste of food? I've not had that question before in my malnutrition training. Interesting one.
My mental health, that's why.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I know when the people give covert medication, they put it in like a spoon of jam or something like that, so it's more not all mixed in with the main meal. I don't know if in your experience, if you're offering it in every meal that they're eating, or if you put it in yogurt or something like that. Are you able to share your experience?
It varies. I know some medications change, so someone will put it in a cup of tea and it changes the taste of the tea, so therefore they're not getting the medication or the hydration.
So declining it, that's really difficult, isn't it? I think that's something to discuss with the medical team and weighing up the benefits and the cons. Like if they're not drinking and not eating, then that's going to have more risk as well, as considering that and they're not taking the medication. So that's obviously really challenging when they've got these complex mental health needs as well as their physical health needs. But trialing different things that it can be mixed into, especially having to have multiple tablets a day. That is a challenging one, definitely, and it could change the taste. So likely they aren't going to eat or drink it. So trialing different ones that they could tolerate. But we acknowledge there's always limitations with that one. It is a challenge. That's just the answers there. We've already gone through them. I've also highlighted throughout the food diary where enrichment has been added. We'll cover enrichment in more detail in a little bit, but it goes to show there's always opportunity to add something, whether you're using fortified milk in the drinks that you're offered for those that like milky drinks, but also it's also how much you're adding, because we're seeing in some homes there'll be like a generic level of fortification used for all residents, but to make a difference, you really be needing to add it at each level, at each portion. And I'll show in detail in another slide about how much it can really add up to throughout the day, but it's just very possible. There's opportunity to add it at all different meals and snacks. This here is from the pathway. This is an About Me page. I know homes do different things. Some people do like a passport. Some people have diet cards. Some people pin them up in the kitchen. Some people put them in the residence folder. But it is just really useful to have it all in one place for anyone that's supporting that resident where they're eating and drinking, what their preferences are and requirements, perhaps from a religious background, texture background, any allergies and intolerances, and just what they like and don't like. And then in terms of what they're at their different meal times, they might really like a cup of tea in bed in the morning, or they really like to eat meals with other residents. So just putting it all in one place so that anyone that comes to help with that person knows what they're doing. So all in all, the food diary is a really useful tool for identifying preferences and patterns, and then seeing how can I apply that when it comes to producing my care plan, and how can I use all that information for that resident and put it all together. A bit more information about this food-based approach. I've been mentioning it in passing here, there, and everywhere. In Bob, so our area, we recommend this 1-2-3 method. So you can add up to 1,000 calories a day plus protein plus the vitamins and minerals and fibre through, we would say, these 1-2-3 methods. That's 1 pint of fortified milk, 2 snacks at least, and 3 enriched meals. So I'm going to share. So when we're talking about the food-based approach, you can do a mix and match, as we said, but like the fortified milk on its own, a pint of fortified milk with some extra 4 tablespoons of milk powder, you make that up in a jug and then use that for your resident anytime they've got having a cup of tea or coffee. You can make whole milky drinks with that milk when they're having cereals or porridge, or asking chef to use it for sauces and things like that. It really adds up and can provide around 500 calories and around 30 grams of protein just through that. And these extra snacks, I'll give some examples throughout, but there's high energy ones and low energy ones, and trying to get protein in there as well. And then the enriched meals that we're showing from the food diary, you can add enrichment all throughout the day, and it really adds up and makes a difference. And I'll share some examples in a minute. Oh, I don't expect that animation. So I've got here a video. Let's see if it works. We will see. So this, just to give you a background, is from one of our areas. This is from the Berkshire Dietitians Trust, and they have put together a video. So they do a very slightly different recipe, but still gets around 500 calories. And they're going to talk through making up fortified milk, and then how you can then use that to make up some nourishing drinks. And Sarah, if you don't mind flagging up if it's not working, that would be helpful. God. Stop there. Okay, so we have some recipes. We've got the milkshake standard recipe, but we also have alternative milky recipes, and then we also have a whole sheet of fruity recipes and dairy-free recipes. So there's we know in care homes that milkshakes are produced in all the care homes I've been to or worked with, and on average they do provide enough energy, but I did notice a bit of lacking with how much protein they're providing. So making sure your care home's adding milk powder, so skim milk powder, will just help top up the amount of protein that's in that drink. You can use pea protein and soya protein powders for residents that can't tolerate milk. And then that is a really useful tool to get some extra calories and protein in to that resident's intake throughout the day, and not just offering it as a choice on the milk trolley, the drinks trolley, but also making sure it's in that care plan that you're going to be offering them those 2 preferred nourishing drinks a day, and then checking to actually see, are they having it, so that you know that it's having the therapeutic benefit or not. Sorry, the slide's a little bit messy there. We are also talking about enrichment. So there's lots of different tools and things. You might be familiar with butter and cream, and you may already be using milk powder. Oh, Sarah's provided the recipes, thank you. You'll also be shared the recipes and resources when you receive your certificate of attendance. So in terms of enrichment is a tool to add energy and protein where possible to foods and drinks without increasing the volume of the meal. And so that really supports people that have appetite problems. I've presented some milky and milk-free milk-free alternatives, because not everyone can tolerate milk. So where someone can have butter, or you could have vegan spread instead. There are plant-based creams made from oats or soya. You can get vegan cheeses. I mentioned the pea protein or soya protein powder. And then there are like coconut yogurts as alternative to regular yogurt, and just some alternative options at the bottom. There's also nut butters and ground almonds. There's even more things you can consider. There's smashed dates, there's smashed avocado, and olive oil instead of butter. There's lots and lots of options. And also think about things you can put on porridge or sweet treats. You've got jam, you've got honey, you've got condensed milk, etc. Chocolate spread, biscuit spread. There's lots of things you can add that then add some extra calories or extra more nutrient dense options for the extra protein and the vitamins and minerals, fibre. Because for aging well, this is from the British Dietetic Association. They produced a resource about aging well. It's not just about calories. We're not just trying to get energy in. It's also about supporting all their overall health with the vitamins, the minerals, and the fibre. Support their bone health, support their overall frailty, and really getting them to age well where possible. I know the whole point is they're really limited for what they can eat, but where they can, we can try and make the most of that nutrition we're providing. Another principle of food, I think this is just summary. Another principle of food, so far we've done the pint of fortified milk. We've looked at enriching of different meals and trying to get some more nutrient dense options in there. And then the last one there are some snacks. So we'd encourage at least 2 high energy snacks a day. Pop some options here of some more nutrient dense options. Try to encourage, excuse me, to move away from biscuits and cake as the default and think what else can we offer that's a bit more nourishing. So thinking it as an opportunity to provide some fibre, perhaps to help with constipation and things like that. Things like flapjacks, because they're made with fibrous oats and dried fruit, and they're still high in energy. Or you might consider some like cheese scones or Scotch eggs, for example, because they've got some extra protein. Got a list here which you can reflect on, provide the slides at the end, but some lower calorie to higher calorie options, and where there's asterisks, the little stars, they also provide protein, so a medium amount or a larger amount of protein. So it's wherever possible, try and think about protein. So if you had someone that's between their meals and they still have some appetite to eat something, don't default for cake or biscuits, but default to think, actually, could they have a Scotch egg or something, or a bit of put pate on toast, and it's acquired taste bit if they like it, that sort of thing. Again, get some extra protein, and that will help with wound care, healing. It helps with their frailty and keeping their independence. And there's vegan versions, so fruit with nut butter is a really good alternative for adding some extra protein plus fibre, for example. This is just a summary of our recipe. Just wanted to highlight for the milky drinks, from visits out to care homes, a lot of care homes, I don't know if it's just from what the catering companies stock, but they often use crusher, and I often see no added sugar crusher. The benefit instead of a fortified milkshake powder would be that you'd then be giving some extra vitamins and or minerals. They have added in sometimes vitamin D and C, and some B vitamins or the calcium, etc. So they just have that, you're providing extra nutrition in that same drink than you would do if you were just having crusher, which is basically just pink syrup. It's not even got the sugar in it to give some extra energy. So you would definitely make more of an impact having a fortified milkshake powder where you can. And there's some different options there of the dried milk powders. The differences are the skim milk powder versus the whole milk powder. A bit more calories in the whole milk powder, but a little less of the protein. So just to show, going into in detail, but I mentioned before about the food diary and where you can add in all these different opportunities. This food diary shows through all those additions where you've been adding some extra butter, some extra cream, some extra cheese, etc., and milk powders, can add 1,000 calories plus an extra 40 grams of protein. You can also add the more nutrient dense options like the ground almonds and the apple pie, for example. And also if they were, extra slide I wasn't expecting. all this summary shows all these different options that we mentioned before, but nice picture version. So not forgetting the smashed avocados and the olive oil is some more heart healthy enrichment, and there is still alternative protein powders, and all sorts can be added. We're going to work through some examples. Sorry, dairy free is coming up. Sorry, I was forgetting about my dairy free. So example protein porridge. Sorry. So say you had your serving of porridge oats with some regular milk. On that on its own, nearly 400 calories, 16 grams protein. But if you were to add for that one serving an extra 2 tablespoons of milk powder plus some cream, tablespoon splash of cream, and even 2 tablespoons of ground almonds, you don't have to do all of those, but it just goes to show how it all adds up. You're almost doubling the calories there. In fact, you're doubling the calories and having an extra 17 grams of protein just from that one meal alone. So you're already halfway there nearly to your goal of an extra 1,000 calories a day, just from some simple ingredients. For soup, start off with, fresh cream of tomato soup, 200 calories, about 5 grams protein. But by adding 2 tablespoons of milk powder, a small handful of grated cheese, or 3 tablespoons of yogurt, would bring it up by 300 calories and over 20 grams protein. Really makes soup go from a low protein meal to a high protein one. And if you had just coffee and biscuits with a splash of milk, you could upgrade your biscuits and then add some milk powder into the coffee. So you either make up that fortified milk as a jug, so milk plus milk powder, stir it up, and then have that on hand for whenever they're having their tea and coffee. Or when you've just got the coffee itself, you can add the milk powder in there and then. A little bit more lumpy, you just got to really give it a good stir with your fork or spoon, just make sure the lump's gone. Anyway, that would add an extra nearly 400 calories and nearly 20 grams of protein. We've got a question opportunity here. Don't worry about the QR code. I'm just going to put it in the chat as well. Which combination would add the most protein to a standard bowl of soup? Now bear with me while I copy and paste the individual answers. Right. Not a quick way of doing it. I have to do them one by one, sorry. And the last one. There we go, it's in the chat there. So which combination adds the most protein to a standard bowl of soup? A, 2 tablespoons skim milk powder and 30 grams grated cheese. B, 1 tablespoon of cream and 2 tablespoons of olive oil. C, 3 tablespoons of yogurt and 1 tablespoon of butter. Or D, 2 tablespoons of ground almonds and 1 tablespoon of sugar. Not seeing any confident answers. I guess you're obviously not, nutrition might be your expertise. So in terms of this soup, going back to the soup example, suggestion of milk powders, cheeses and yogurts, they will add some protein. So out of these answers, I would go for A, so the 2 tablespoons of skim milk powder plus grated cheese. Option B would provide calories, but no protein from cream and olive oil. The yogurt would provide protein, but butter wouldn't. And then option D, ground almonds would provide some protein. But you wouldn't want to put sugar in soup anyway. Trick question. And if you had a resident that didn't like milky drinks, as we've been saying, there's so many options for alternatives. And that's if they don't like milky drinks, you could still make the most of snacks like boiled eggs, cheese straws, pork pies, your enriched soups. They might like yogurts still, or if not, there are the milk-free yogurts made from coconut, soy and oat, and offering them fruity drinks is the main thing. And in terms of what a difference it can make with dairy-free, a lot of dairy-free options aren't as enriched in protein, but you can still get an extra 1,000 calories a day and just a bit less protein through those extra soya creams, vegan cheeses, pea and soy protein, ground almonds, nut butters, and the dairy-free nourishing drinks. Got a summary here of our resources. So we've got like a standard, all the different food-based interventions, and then a plant-based alternative. And then we've got the the dairy-free drinks, the fruity drinks and the milky drink recipes, and a wound care resource, and I think that's it. There are lots of resources there to try and help meet residents' needs. So there's lots that we can do through that 1, 2, 3 method. We're trying to add an extra pint of milk enriched with milk powder throughout the day in their drinks and cereals, and then the enriched meals and drinks and the extra snacks on top in combination according to their preferences to try and get an extra up to 1,000 calories a day and protein where we can. Just want to touch on hydration. So we know older adults need up to about 2 litres a day, and if they don't drink enough, they are more at risk of dehydration. That risk increases if they're feverish or sweating, or they're ill, and they might have a reduced sensation of thirst. And we know that when they're dehydrated, it can lead to urinary infections, more likely to get constipated and have blood pressure issues, more at risk of falls, pressure ulcers, poor wound healing, and death. In terms of what we can do to better hydrate residents, I've seen some excellent solutions, like the decorated drinks trolleys, making it excited, or themed drinking opportunities like afternoon teas and picnics and things like that. People put the fruit in those water canisters. That makes it a bit more visually appealing. Obviously using their preferred cups or adapted cups as needed, and it's helpful to know what the volume of your cups and mugs are in your own home, so you actually know how much your residents are having. If they can, they could have a whole glass of fluid when they're having their medicines rather than just a sip. So just another opportunity to get them drinking. And then also just reassuring, it's actually a little bit of a myth that if you drink less, you toilet less. Some older adults don't like to drink too much because the issue's going to the bathroom. But actually, if you drink less, it irritates your bladder more. So you might end up more likely to go to the bathroom. But if your resident can't drink, then there are some hydrating foods like scrambled eggs and certain vegetables like cauliflower, cheese, or mashed potato, custard and yogurt and rice puddings. All these things are hydrating foods, so they can help top up someone's fluid intake. That's taken from the malnutrition pathway. And supporting eating. In terms of encouraging and prompting and making meals more social, we know that mealtime is so important for helping their identity and them connecting with other residents or connecting with the staff, and for that quality of life. I think if they're in their room all day, or it breaks up the day and it's a bit of normalcy, and it brings joy, and it's a pleasurable experience when it's made to be. So adjusting, having nice music playing, and background noise really depends on the residents. Some eat better with background noise and some eat worse. So it's identifying what's the preference for that resident and making it appropriate, and helping them join in with the mealtime prep where possible, and making it so it helps with the cues for appetite. So if they know, like, they're helping put out cutlery where they can, or they're I don't know, laying out the placemats, it just helps their brain get registering that it's mealtime now and I need to get ready to eat. And keeping a track of all those preferences and everything on that About Me document are important for that mealtime, and whether they need assistance. We know that if there are more staff available to assist at mealtimes, that's protective for the prevalence of malnutrition in that care home. So if everyone's on board, even I've seen the managers come down and they're helping with, I don't know, washing their hands or making the meal environment tidy, cutting up their food, or just making it all prepared, that makes eating better and a more pleasurable experience. I've also seen feedback prompts, so they've got iPads or tablets on the walls, or they do a handheld a piece of paper to actually respond what they liked about that meal or what they didn't, and that gets fed back to the chef. Also looking at waste logs that can help inform what kind of foods the residents do eat, like eating or not. In terms of swallowing and chewing difficulties, that's where the speech and language therapists have their expertise and can support in terms of adapting textures. But we know that dysphagia is actually much more prevalent in people that are living with dementia or Alzheimer's disease, and that might not be just the mechanics of the swallowing and the chewing, but it's also the delay in their brains recognizing that food is in their mouth, or remembering they've got food in their mouth, and there's that delay in the processing from chewing to swallowing, and they might hold the food in their mouth. They might also be more likely to choke or cough and demonstrate that wet sounding voice whilst they're eating and drinking. So it might be, as I said, the recognizing food or sensing it, and that delay from how their brain's been affected. And we know the risk is that the food, fluid or saliva can go into their lungs, and they're more at risk of acquiring pneumonia and other chest infections. And unfortunately, if they've got dementia and a dysphagia, they are actually double at the risk of dying from the aspiration pneumonia. So identifying those signs early on and addressing it where possible, and mouth care becomes very important. If they're holding their food in their mouth, they'll be more likely and at risk of getting tooth decay. Got a flowchart here, but really importantly, all the links for the referral criteria to the speech and language therapist. So where they would see someone is if they're having those, excuse me, where they're having that difficulty swallowing the food and drink, coughing and choking while eating. But where they don't support is if it's more like just a chewing problem or a reflux or vomiting related issue. They don't see people primarily for weight loss where they don't have a swallowing problem. And if someone's documented at choosing to eat and drink at risk, meaning they should be on a texture modified diet, but they don't want to, then that's their acknowledged risk, that they'd prefer to just eat and drink as they like to, even though they're more at risk of choking and coughing. So a speech and language therapist wouldn't see someone again because they're making an informed decision to eat as at risk. A little bit more note about this texture modification. So the benefit is that it can allow people to continue to eat and drink despite having these chewing and swallowing problems. That's okay. And yeah, sorry, the session is for an hour and a half, but we appreciate you've got other commitments in the afternoon, but the session's recorded so you can catch up on the end and you'll still get your certificate. And if you've got chewing problems, that's where they can still be on a texture modified diet, but not for like the swallowing problems, but just they eat better with softer foods like scrambled eggs and mashed potatoes, soaked cereals. You can soak biscuits and stews and very saucy foods, just easier to chew and swallow because they've been cooked really well and are easier to chew. Obviously, referring on to salt if it's more of a swallowing problem. But on the other side, people might not accept these modified diets very well because they're so different from what's normal for them. And so you have to weigh up that risk and think for quality of life. If it means they eat less, then they're going to end up more at risk of malnutrition and dehydration. So having that conversation with the resident and their relatives to what's best for them, and that might be a decision that's made at each meal time, or there might be, as we said, this documented eating and drinking at risk. And very important to make it as visually appealing as possible. Just because you're pureeing it doesn't mean it just has to be a bowl of brown, as I call it, because if that were you wouldn't be very in the mood to eat that because it's not very appetizing. So you can use molds now and try and recreate the original form to make it much more visually appealing and still feel as normal as possible. So case study for you, got Mrs. Patel. She's had a stroke, and so we're going to be thinking how would we address her swallow. So she's 82, she was admitted from a rehab unit after her stroke. She's got some right-sided weakness, some communication issues. She has been seen by the speech and language therapist. They've been recommending level 4 puree diet and level 3 moderately thick fluids. She's refusing her meals though. She finds them unappetizing. She's pocketing the food in her mouth. The family are now concerned because she's losing her weight and not enjoying her foods. So what could you do to make the meals more appealing? What role could the family have? And do you know any techniques for helping when she's pocketing her food? I'm just going to copy the questions. It's a bit more of a free format. We've already got some. Thank you, John. Getting information from the family about previous likes and dislikes. Yes, very good. Especially she might have some more culturally familiar meals that might be able to be adapted to make more into puree, so then they're a bit more familiar. And with pocketing, I mentioned mouth care earlier is really important, because if you're holding that food in her mouth, then her teeth are more at risk of tooth decay. So making sure she's being prompted to clear each mouthful before taking in another one, and maybe a small sip of fluid, making sure that mouth is clear before then moving on, making sure she's not being asked to talk while chewing, sorry, and just making sure that's being supported throughout. The answer's here. Sorry, the previous way of eating, with hands, that is true. If she is not able to use cutlery anymore, that definitely becomes more challenging the softer that the food is. And she might then need to be spoon fed, which then is a conversation around that lack of independence. But it's still important to acknowledge how frustrated she might be with this change of texture and really validate her feelings there. We talked about asking the family and her what she used to enjoy eating, and see if you can replicate any of those flavors or the presentation, but making it puree appropriate, involving the family and the kitchen together, molding the foods, making it recognizable, making sure she's still offered choice where she can, and then any other cues to encourage her to clear that mouth, and make sure she's upright and well supported during the meals. Meal need to slow down that pace of feeding and allow more time between the bites, and then referring to the speech and language therapist if needed to have follow-up or whatever, and needing it to adapt it. But just make sure that meal times is as dignified as well, because when you're needing to be spoon-fed, imagine what that's like for yourself, and how difficult it is to have someone else time your meals and your spoons, and the meal size. It's so challenging. So making sure you're, as much as possible, trying to see it from her side as well. In terms of weight loss and dementia, it's very common, but can be due to a lot of different things, and also affected by how rapidly their dementia is progressing, and also what part of the brain has been affected. So we know that with dementia, there is an increased risk of problems such as pressure sores, problems like other infections, falls, dizziness, confusion, but not everyone does experience weight loss. Some actually gain weight because they might forget that they've eaten and then eat again. Or on the other hand, people with dementia might lose their sense of taste or smell, and so they end up preferring sweeter foods. That's very common, and so certain techniques for making main meals sweeter, or some people offer double puddings and enriching them where possible, but you can make main meals sweeter with like condiments, or people add honey to peas and things like that to make it still sweeter and still enjoyable. Their appetite and thirst may be affected because that part of the brain that recognizes fullness is affected, and they might also just be more at risk of depression and other illnesses. They've become less active, so then that impacts their appetite. And they might also be in pain, so having side effects from any medications that they're prescribed, along with those communication issues, and their being able to communicate that they're hungry or thirsty or full. Some people also lose the ability to recognize their food, and so they're turning away their heads and refusing it or spitting it out, or even eating non-edible items. So it's very challenging, and it really affects all aspects. You can have training just on dementia, and the eating and drinking related to that. So this is just an overview really, but it's just recognizing the signs and how it can impact so many different aspects of their eating and drinking. But one strategy that we try and encourage is these finger foods. So where it helps maintain independence, where they might have dexterity issues with the picking up of cutlery, and also if they have wandering, so they are getting up and moving about during meals, they're not going to be able to sit down and eat a typical roast dinner, but you can make roast dinner into a finger food as long as you don't have gravy, so they can still have the roast potatoes as wedges. You could have more like carrots in wedges, or broccoli, and then they can chew it and the meat can be picked up, as long as they don't have the dysphagia issues as well. But that's just something to consider. You can do all sorts, or you can make pasta in the muffin trays into little muffin cakes. I don't know what to call them, but they're easier to pick up and eat. Or simple things like chicken goujons and chips, but instead of having beans, you might have the soft carrot wedges or peppers or something, so they're still getting a bit of extra nutrition. And then some people will do graze boxes or use those bum bags, or have boxes of food around, so that when they're moving out around and about, they can pick and eat, or be prompted to eat safely where they still can. So you've got another case study here. This is Mrs. Johnson, 79, dementia. She's wandering more. She's struggling to use her knife and fork. She's getting up during the meals and throughout the day, pacing the corridors. You've not been able to weigh her, but she's got that mid-upper arm circumference of 22, which is low, indicating underweight. And she's got a preference for sweet foods. So who could you refer to for her, and what can you change? This lady, I would offer some sweet finger foods and refer to that occupational therapy to see if they can support with any adapted cutlery and crockery. She might be offered these high energy snacks at her meal times as well, rather than standard meals. Quick note on diabetes. So we don't say that diabetic foods are recommended. They can still have a standard diet. We don't exclude anything. We also would say that diabetes can be medically managed, whereas malnutrition can't. You can't take a pill to gain weight. So that becomes more the immediate priority, and then the rest of the medical team can monitor that diabetic control. So yeah, we would just say not to be too restricted to diabetes. In end of life, obviously that's just the last few weeks by definition, but that broader picture of that decline, we would recommend not to do intense nutrition interventions for an end of life, because it's supplements, for example, there's no evidence to show they prolong life. There's also nothing in them that can't be found in food, and they can add a lot of pressure to try and gain weight when it's actually just very normal and very expected to reduce that hunger and start refusing food, fluid and medications. And that's the sign of dying. It doesn't make it any easier to witness as carers or family, but it is normal and to be expected. So for those instances that when you're screening, you would see that high risk, but actually we would say an intervention would be limited. So to instead switch to quality of life and offering comfort and companionship. And involving that family in that conversation and setting the expectations, because sometimes relatives in particular can put pressure and say, well, they need to have supplements and things like that, but there's no evidence for them, unfortunately. They're not shown to help. They're almost can be detrimental in the sense they put too much pressure on, and they're not shown to benefit. So now we're putting it all together into a care plan. So first step, thinking of an aim. So just thinking about that, it's just about involving that resident in what is important to them, because we can be very clinical sometimes. We want to reach a certain amount of weight, or we want to get all their weight back on that they've lost. If they're 10 kilos, we can get them 10 kilos back in 2 weeks, and it might not be realistic. But trying to make sure we're considering that whole person approach, what's important for them, and making sure it really matters to them. It might be that they're just a bit more able to partake in those activities that they enjoy by having a bit more energy from eating better. So thinking about that when you come to make up your aim. And then when it comes to a care plan, we would say making sure it's not just generic. So we're not saying Mrs. Bloggs needs to be on a fortified diet. Tick. How can we make it as clear as possible so that anyone picking up that care plan knows what they're doing? So we're wanting to make sure that we're documenting how high risk they are and why, and what that aim is, whether you're trying to regain 2 kilos or something, or improve their wound healing. And then document any relevant preferences, like those milky drinks, for example, and then any other cultural or medical restrictions to their diet. And then setting that realistic goal. So not 10 kilos in 2 weeks, that's not realistic, or setting a really specific BMI. It's not entirely meaningful, but making it meaningful to the resident and then personalised as possible. So we've got Mrs. Johnson for this case study, and she's high risk of malnutrition because she's lost 6 kilos and her low BMI, and she's not drinking well, and she's got poor cognitive impairment, and she's eating slowly and getting tired during her meals. She prefers soft texture foods, sweet flavours, and avoiding red meat, and has some dental issues. And we don't have time to do the case study in detail, unfortunately, today, with the delays in the quiz, but in terms of, have I got the answers? I'm going to go through the answers quickly. So we would put in her must score. We would say why, because she's getting tired and during her meals and eating more slowly. We would note down her preferences, that she likes her soft food, she likes sweet flavours, but she doesn't like red meat. She is diabetic, but there's not any cultural or religious needs there. So a realistic goal of 1 to 2 kilos in 4 weeks, and any action. So we would try and enrich her meals, offer her snacks 3 times a day, and give some examples. Like she likes flapjacks and she likes smoothies and homemade milkshakes. And then she would require weekly weight monitoring and a review in 4 weeks' time. Give an example, that's from the malnutrition care pathway of what it might look like all in one page, and making sure you are reviewing it and seeing if it's working or not. But that just the emphasis there is on being as specific as possible of the bespoke methods that you're going to put in place. We know that they're not going to eat cottage pie every day, so you don't necessarily need to write, we're going to add so much to the cottage pie and this and that. It's just giving an idea that what their preferences are, and where you have the opportunity from the preferences you've identified from their food diary and the conversations with them and their relatives of what you can do to make a difference, and try and get them gaining weight and doing enough, because we're trying to get up to 1,000 calories, so it's on top of what they're already eating and drinking already. So just a reminder, you might be weighing them weekly but screening them fully monthly, and you'd be looking at what they're eating, how their weight is doing, and what their fluid intakes have been, and really identifying if that care plan has had an impact and if you need to escalate it. So that might take place after a month, and then it's good to reflect, because if you've not met your goal, then you need to think why, and is it appropriate to still continue, or whether it might be more appropriate to acknowledge you're limited. So where you might then acknowledge you're limited would be in those end of life situations, or those really end stage progressive conditions, or where they're admitted to hospital, so they've been acutely unwell, so the impact of your plan would have been scuppered, but you might still carry on. Then if you're not limited, then you would then can still consider if it's appropriate to escalate, then please do so. So that might be I've got the links within the pathway to all the local services, and you might want to consider over-the-counter supplements. So we've got some examples here in our resources of things you can purchase within the home, although those homemade milkshake recipes all provide the same calories and protein, so they might not be needed, but they're an option where perhaps their supplements are requested or something. It keeps you going. And it's important for everybody in the care home to take responsibility for monitoring weight and intakes, and part of that whole care plan approach for managing malnutrition. We know that when there's more staff available, when more staff are trained, overall prevalence of malnutrition in the home is much lower. So all in all, so far we've talked about how you would, those 4 steps approach, you would look at screening for their malnutrition, addressing those underlying causes, putting in a care plan, and then reviewing it. And that malnutrition pathway is what we've been going through today. Now, just finally wanting to touch on supplements, mention them briefly throughout, for like they wouldn't be appropriate in end of life, for example, but there's the Bob ICB, so that's the commissioning board. They decide which drugs and medicines are approved for use and things like that. They don't support the routine prescribing of supplements in care homes unless someone needs supplements for tube feeding, or they've got a dysphagia, so they can't swallow very well, so they need because they're underweight, they need a specific pre-thickened supplement. And unless a specialist has recommended it, they wouldn't be supported. So really, it comes down to where their nutrition needs, can't be met through food and drink alone. Perhaps they've got an absorption issue. So even if they can eat, the nutrition from that food is not being absorbed, or there's a reason that they can't eat enough, or they're burning off more than they can physically eat. If those situations do not apply, then for routine use, we would support food-based interventions like we've been discussing today. If a supplement is considered, it would be considered by a specialist, and they would choose certain products that are applicable to that resident's preferences and needs, and then they should be monitored, aiming for just a check-in in 4 to 6 weeks to see if they're having a therapeutic impact. And you've got to think it's got to be on top of what they're eating and drinking to make a difference, and not as a replacement. They're a supplement, and they should be stored in the fridge. And then we do have a fact sheet about supplements to set the expectations of them. As I said, there's nothing in them that can't be found in food, and homemade milkshakes provide just as much, if not way more, energy and protein, and they're more familiar and much more palatable and easy to drink. So just highlighting all our resources there. So on our website, we've got, as I said, those drinks recipes and high protein snack options and different enrichments for plant-based and regular diets. You can get in touch with our team at this email, bobicb.medicines@nhs.net. Also put in our contact details for the community teams. And just lastly, if you could please complete this evaluation form in order to get your certificate of attendance and completion for your CPD records. I want to thank you for your attendance and apologise for the technical difficulties. And if you, on completion, when we send out certificates, we'll be linking in all our resources and the malnutrition pathway, which has been mentioned throughout. And if you've got any questions, I'll be staying on for an extra 10 minutes or so. Thank you very much.